Do you find that there's like a specific reason why you would want to share your story?
People need to get more comfortable talking about that, and just more comfortable talking about grief in general. And honestly, like, if I can help one person feel like they have a safe space, and honestly, like, they're not alone, like, I feel like I've done my job. There are people who are going through this alone and are watching loved ones going through MAiD and are having their loved ones then taken away and have nobody to talk to about it. Maybe it's a phone call a week later of, how are you doing? But honestly, in that moment, what are they expected to say? Not doing that hot. I'm not doing that great. I had heard that there was, groups that dealt with grief, support groups. But I think what really needs to happen is, even leading up to that 10 days, or even in that moment, whether it's a physical pamphlet or like an email, a link, something that they can physically either do, go to, write to, call, text, a hotline, something, so that people know, even if they don't choose to use it, they know it's there. They know that at a moment's notice, there is somebody that they can either make an appointment, something in the foreseeable future, or something right then and there, that they can have resources. That in a moment of grief, they don't have to go searching for something. They don't have to struggle to find support. What I would hope is that it just becomes more accessible and it becomes more comfortable to talk about, and we start the dialogue. And that's what you're doing here. I think you've opened the door. We just need people to step through it now.
I remember listening to a podcast on medical assistance in dying many months after my grandma had passed. The woman interviewed was named Lauren Clark, a social worker who was involved in an organization based in Ontario called Bridge C14. I didn't know much about it other than I knew they offered support specific to MAiD. I connected with Lauren online, and she agreed to an interview.
Bridge C14 is an access point for individuals through all stages of medical assistance in dying. So we offer information around how to navigate medical assistance in dying, because we know that the process is complicated, it can be unreliable at times. And so what we offer is supports for individuals who are choosing medical assistance in dying, individuals who are supporting someone choosing to access assisted death, or for those who are grieving a MAiD loss.
When it comes to MAiD, what are some of the stages of grief that you see that are most common?
What the feedback is from individuals who come to us for support is saying that time leading up is often the hardest. It's this countdown and this ticking clock, and it becomes this series of 15 days, 14 days, and that countdown, and they grapple with, how do you spend quality time with that person without also impacting them negatively with some of those grief experiences. And, some are shielding their loved one from seeing tears or those frustrations with the process and the navigation of the MAiD journey itself. So we know that these stages really, it affects each person individually, and it also really starts to extend and have this ripple effect on those who are around them. The biggest misconception that I find for individuals who have supported someone who has chosen MAiD is that they agree and support the decision, yet want the individual to continue living. And so they struggle with that ability to process that, which greatly impacts their grief.
Maybe we can talk about, for the families left behind, what does Bridge C14 provide for them?
For individuals who are grieving a MAiD loss, we offer, again, access to grief-related supports and resource information. We offer one-to-one peer support. not only for those who are grieving the MAiD loss, but also those who are supporting someone pre-MAiD, so that they can connect with someone who has that lived experience, and just to be able, again, to answer questions. Often that's what it is more questions or worries about how do I prepare, or is my grief, is this what I'm experiencing, is this normal? And so we allow them to that opportunity to connect with someone who's already gone through this, so that they can help to process and see, okay, my grief, what this MAiD death has been validated and my experience has been validated. So we have the one-to-one peer supports. We offer the drop-in sessions for individuals who are grieving a MAiD loss, so that, again, they can connect with others at any point in the time after following the MAiD loss. And what does that timeline look like? People are dropping in very early after the loss, within the first few weeks. We have some who come in within the first few months, and we have others who are maybe 1, 2, 3 or 4 years out from the MAiD loss, who come to really just do this drop-in, check-in support, and just to kind of connect with others. And then we also have our 10-week grief support groups, which are a structured grief group that offers, again, that peer connection, but in a very much a structured approach to identifying their grief, processing their grief, and experiencing that grief. And again, it's focused solely on MAiD-specific grief. There are generalized grief and bereavement groups out there, but what people have identified to us is they want to be able to talk about the MAiD death in a safe and supportive way. And the only way sometimes to do that is to be around others who have been through it themselves. I've always said the hardest thing for me to hear is somebody saying, I wish I had known about you sooner. So I'll always say, I'm so glad you found us. Yes, I do wish you would have heard about us sooner, because people have identified that the earlier the intervention and support is available, the easier it is to move through the grief journey. It doesn't take away the grief or the pain, but it helps to ease those transitions through each stage. And it's incredible to see the demand, but also the enthusiasm from our volunteers who are coming and saying, I want to give back.
I started this documentary process to create a resource for people, not only to learn more about MAiD, but also what it means to have it offered in Canada. So I wanted to learn more about what the future might hold for us as Canadians.
Regarding the future of MAiD in Canada, I'd like to see more people aware of it. I live in a MAiD bubble. I am talking about MAiD and working in MAiD all the time. I just assume everybody knows about it. But the truth is, although it's been 5 or 6 years already, a lot of Canadians don't know about it and don't realize it's available, it's legal, it's a covered medical service that doesn't cost any money, it doesn't affect your life insurance beneficiaries. These are things that people ask about, and I think wider knowledge of the option would be an improvement, actually. And I think Canadians deserve to know that this is there for them.
For the future of MAiD in Canada, what I would like to see is it being available, accessible for anybody who might want it. It should be part of the end of life discussion for anybody who is at the end of life.
I think it's important that Canadians continue the conversation. I think there are debates that need to still happen. Canadians very much want to have advance requests for MAiD. They've made that clear through a number of national polls.
There are things that could be done better. There are things that I would like to see changed. I would like people to, in particular, be able to make an advance request for a medically assisted death. I think that's the single most important future change for the better. That's not the same thing as a waiver of final consent in somebody who's already requested and been found eligible. We're talking about people being able to say, if I lose capacity, but I start to suffer intolerably, I want to be able to have a medically assisted death. We want to see the end of the ability of healthcare facilities to prohibit MAiD on site if they're publicly funded. We would also say, now this is going to be necessary only a few times each year, but mature minors ought to be able to request a medically assisted death. There's no real difference between a 16-year-old with intolerable pain from a brain tumor and his 18-year-old neighbor, as far as their need to have a medically assisted death if they see that as the way of ending their intolerable suffering. We are talking mature minors here. We're not talking about somebody who isn't able to make their own decision. But to say that we've already ended the paternalistic view that mature minors can't make decisions about their own health in every other way except MAiD.
I'm not saying it's a simple conversation. I think it's very complex, actually. I think it's much more nuanced than people think. But I think these are the debates that we need to have. Just because they're difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't have them. I think we should talk about how we can structure a system to allow advanced requests made in Canada. I think there are other models out there that we can base our model on. I think it can be done. I just think we need to have the discussion.
In terms of my personal ideas about MAiD in Canada in the future, I'm not speaking for Comox Valley Hospice Society, but I think the trajectory of acknowledging that MAiD is a legal choice that people can make in Canada will evolve, much as it has in places that have a much longer history with medical assistance in dying, whether that's Switzerland or the Netherlands or Belgium. And what we've seen historically is that there's a very conservative view of MAiD initially. And in Canada, that was very limited. You had to have a foreseeable death within a very short period of time. We've now expanded that to not have to have a foreseeable death, but to have conditions that are so painful that a person doesn't want to wait until the death is foreseeable. And we've also added in some mental health components legally. But in other places, like the Netherlands, you can anticipate that your capacity at the end of life will not be, you will not have the same level of intellectual capacity to make a choice. And so advance directives where a person decides when they're healthy that I don't want to live under these conditions. And I would like medical assistance in dying if I get to that stage. And I think that we have seen in other parts of the world that those choices start to come into legislation. And I fully expect in Canada that there will be court cases, and often this has been driven by courts, where people will say, I want my advance directive respected when I get to end of life. And so I expect to see that, and personally I'm supportive of that.
Yeah, looking to the future, I think that's tricky because we're getting into areas that aren't as straightforward. You know, when you're just looking at where death is reasonably foreseeable and its physical issues, to look at further things that are being contemplated around mental anguish, around especially Alzheimer's and dementia, I think that's a really important conversation to have, because I have worked with many people who either the partner or parent is going through Alzheimer's and dementia, or with the person themselves at the beginning, and they're saying, I don't want to go through 15 years of this. I don't want to put my family through 15 years of this.
The issue of mental health patients and whether mental health disorders as a sole underlying condition, should lead to access to MAiD. Again, a very complicated subject, not an easy answer. Our law is going to allow that in March of 2023. So we are going to have that. It is time now to be having that discussion. How should we approach these patients? How can we safeguard what is potentially a vulnerable population? Is this something we can do safely? I think that it is possible. I think it's difficult. I don't have the answers to that. But I don't have the answers because I'm not an expert in all of these things. There are people out there who are. We should be talking to them. They should be informing us. This is the potential future of MAiD in Canada. Maybe a long way away, but we should be having those discussions. I think we also need to consider access for mature minors. I think it seems like an uncomfortable conversation as well, but I come from the other end with babies and children, and God forbid a situation of a 17 or a 16-year-old child is suffering intolerably. It would be very, very uncommon. It would be rare, I would think, that any family or patient would really ask to end a child's life. But there are patients who are mature minors, who are 16, 17, 18 years of age, who fully understand what's happening to them, what their options are, and may well choose this option. Controversial? Yes. A discussion we should be having? Probably.
Dying with Dignity Canada is a charity. It is the only national organisation that campaigned for medical assistance in dying to become legal, and now campaigns for the necessary improvements in the law. Another reason why I'm involved with Dying with Dignity is there's still work to be done. We want the prohibition, the ability for healthcare facilities to prohibit MAiD to be made illegal. It is wrong that healthcare facilities that are publicly funded can deny patients the right to have MAiD in those facilities. Dying with Dignity is campaigning for that. We are campaigning actually for improvement in all end-of-life care. People worry, they say, well, shouldn't you be doing more, shouldn't more be done about palliative care so that people don't have to choose a medically assisted death? Now, I have to say that actually people choosing to have a medically assisted death is not generally because of, in fact, it's rarely because of inadequate palliative care. Palliative care just simply cannot solve all the problems at the end of life, particularly, for example, pain. But yes, of course, palliative care should be available to all Canadians and available in enough quality, and there should be enough quality and quantity about palliative care that it isn't an issue. And we are helping in the campaign for that too.
I hope that the church can help in that conversation, in just understanding compassion and understanding, God's presence and all of that.
I think what's going to change is that it's going to become more common. In areas where there's no real barrier in terms of access, so we have enough providers and assessors. I mean, we are working hard and we're doing a lot of MAiD work, but there's no difficulty accessing us. So here on Vancouver Island, for example, 7 to 8% of all deaths annually are by medical assistance in dying. Now in the Netherlands, where MAiD has been legal for 20 years, it's 4%. They're actually quite a conservative nation, interestingly. In BC, generally, it's about 4 to 4.5%. Across Canada, it's about 2.5%. Now, there are differences. BC is not a particularly religious part of Canada, especially Vancouver Island. And there are other parts of Canada which are more religious, and those people in those areas are going to be less likely. But part of the problem is access. And I have to say, I wake up every morning so happy that I live in a country civilized enough for that to be true.
There are events that I attend that I can't help but project myself into. I help people of all ages. I might help a woman who's in her 50s. I might help a woman who has children the same age as mine, or a woman who reminds me of my mother. It's impossible not to think of those things for me. So I do think it helps me focus on what's important in my life and to keep that focus front and center. So that's been a gift for sure.
Good things take time. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the upcoming changes to the law expand the potential eligibility of those who are seeking MAiD. My hope is that the people choosing MAiD and their families will be able to find the resources that are out there to help them through their experience when they need it the most.